Okay, so this Sicha is a Sicha from Lekutei Sichas Chelik Tes.
Sorry.
It's very interesting the way it speaks about, it combines a very interesting Avodraham that talks about the Haftorahs of the different weeks. We've mentioned this before, that the Haftorahs after Tisha B'Av are called Shiva de Nechemta. It doesn't really have to do, openly, it doesn't have to do with the Parsha of the week. In general, the Haftorah has to do with the Parsha of the Shavua. When it comes to the 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, they're called Shiva de Nechemta. There's 7 Haftorahs of consolation, where it speaks about the Nechama of Klal Yisrael because of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Avodraham, interestingly, says how there's a certain seder why Haftorah number 1 is number 1, not number 2, and number 2 comes to an answer like to number 1, and then number 3 comes to like to answer number 2. We'll see a little bit about it. But the Rebbe always, even places where the Haftorah doesn't have a real connection with the Parsha, the Rebbe says anyway, even though it's not officially connected with the Parsha, anyway it has to do with a connection with the Parsha. And in this case, he's going to connect it last week's Haftorah on last week's Parsha with this week's Haftorah on this week's Parsha. Has to do with something that last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha are different, which is the first Parsha and the second Parsha of Krias Shema. Shema Yisrael v'Hafta is in Parshas Vo'eschanan. V'hoyim Shemoya Tishmu is in Parshas Eikev. So when the Rebbe is going to say, when you're going to compare and contrast these two parts of Krias Shema, the first Parsha of Krias Shema, V'Haftas Hashem Elokecha, with the second Parsha of Krias Shema, V'hoyim Shemoya, we will also be able to understand the differences in the Haftorah, why last week's Haftorah is last week's Haftorah and this week's Haftorah is this week's Haftorah. Let's see it inside. Haftorah Shniyah Metech Shiva de Nechemta, the second Haftorah of the 7 Haftorahs, which is Haftorahs of comfort. It starts off with the words V'toimer tzion azavani Hashem v'Hashem shchachani. B'medrash nemar sh'Haftorah zu mahava hemshech la'Haftorah kademes nachmu ami. It's continuation, like we said before. B'Haftorah Rishayna last week, the first Haftorah after Tisha B'Av, Poina Kadosh Baruch Hu al Neviim, Sheheim Yenachmu Yisrael. That's who he's talking about. Nachmu is a tzivui, right? Hashem is saying Nachmu Ami. Who is Hashem being mitzvah to be Menachem? He's saying to the Neviim, you the Neviim be Menachem my nation. Valkach Meshiva Knes Yisrael Azavani Hashem v'Hashem shchachani Yisrael roitzim b'nechama haba meis HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmoi v'loi b'emtzois HaNeviim. Don't send us the Neviim to be Menachem us. We want you, Hashem, to be Menachem. Shtei Haftorah say Lu Nachmu v'Tomer Tzion Nikvu le'amar b'chol shana b'Parshas Vo'eschanan Nachmu, or Parshas Eikev we say v'Tomer Tzion. Mekach muvan Parshas Vo'eschanan kshura l'nechama shebemtzois HaNeviim. That parsha has to do with a nechama that only comes from Neviim, not directly from Hashem. Parshas Eikev kshura l'tviyasam shel bnei Yisrael shakadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmei yenachma. Roi v'psukim v'parsha shebeparshas Vo'eschanan oiskim binyanim shetoichnam einam zohel l'toichn ha'psukim v'parsha shebeparshas Eikev. If you have 2 parshas and they're talking about different topics, so they're different topics, they're different ideas. You don't have something to really point out. Exactly, no comparison, because this is talking about this and this is talking about that. Ach yeshnam shtei parshas haf parsha rishayna shel Krias Shema shebeVo'eschanan va'parsha shniyah shebeEikev asher oisekes b'ofen klali b'oisei inyan v'niten lahashvis b'neiim umekach sheb'neiim yesh mispar hevdelim niker hahevdel shebein shtei parshas elu b'chlal. By seeing the difference between just that part, V'Hafta, Shema Yisrael V'Hafta, and V'hoyim Shemoya, this gives us an outlook on what Parshas Vo'eschanan is about in general, and what Parshas Eikev is about in general. And therefore, why Parshas Vo'eschanan says Nachmu Nachmu, and why Parshas Eikev says Vatomer Tzion. Chelik ma'avdelim shvein Parshas Elu, of the two Parshas of Krias Shema, the Parsha of Vo'eschanan Namar, that V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha. That's what it says in the first Parsha, in Parshas Vo'eschanan. V'ilu Parsha Shniya Namar b'chol levavchem b'chol nafshechem b'lvad b'li lahoisif b'chol me'odecha. That's one difference. Beis, the Parsha Vo'eschanan Namar b'tchila v'shinantam lavanecha v'dibarta bam v'achar kach ukshartam la'ois ha'yadecha, which seems to be a very normal progression. Talks about Shema Yisrael, v'aftas Hashem Elokecha. Then it talks about v'dibarta bam v'shinantam lavanecha v'dibarta bam. Then it talks about the mitzvahs. You learn, and then you do the mitzvahs. Kshartam la'ois ha'yadecha. Well, you should write them on the mezuzahs. Ve'ilu Parsha Shniya ma'fim advarim b'seder hafoch b'tchila ukshartem v'achar kach v'lemadtem. First the mitzvah of tefillin, and then the mitzvah of v'lemadtem you should teach them. K'loimar Parsha Rishina ma'fia ha-Torah l'fnei ha-mitzvahs. Why is the Torah before mitzvahs? It's not just the mitzvah of tefillin, because tefillin is more. Shari kol ha-mitzvahs hukshu l'tefillin. All the mitzvahs of the Torah were likened to tefillin. I saw an interesting Sicha in the Dvar Malchus from last week. The Rebbe brings down from a Zohar how tefillin, we always talk about how tzitzis is reminds us of all the mitzvahs of the Torah, because the gematria of the word tzitzis with the strings and everything. So there's an interesting Zohar that says it about tefillin. So it's like this. The tefillin shorosh has two shins, one on each side. So the value, the gematria of shin is 300. Twice shin is 600. Now, if you put two shins together, that's sheish, that's 6. So you have already 606. And then we know that on the tefillin shorosh, the two shins look different. On one side, the shin has 3. On the other side, the shin has 4 prongs. 3 plus 4 is 7. 606 plus 7 is 613. So we have this idea about how the entire Torah is likened to tefillin as well. So by saying the mitzvah of tefillin after the mitzvah of v'dibarta bam, that means that Torah is not just before tefillin. Tefillin includes all the mitzvahs. Torah comes before mitzvahs in general. Top of the next page, Ve'ilu Parsha Shniya ma'fia tchila ha-mitzvahs. In other words, it starts off with tefillin. First, it talks about the mitzvah of tefillin, v'achar kach Torah. Gimel, the Parsha Rishayna mefiyim tzivuyim belvad. Love Hashem your God, speak in Torah, put on tefillin, put up mezuzahs. That's it. It doesn't talk about what will happen if you do it, what will happen if chas v'sholom you don't do it. V'ilu Parsha Shniya mefurish gama oynish. V'choraf Hashem b'chem, hanitan al v'sartam, v'chein aschar, l'man yirbu yemechem al kiyam ha-mitzvahs. So again, that's another interesting difference, that over there talks about the schar and the oynish as well. In yon mesiyamim, mefiyim shenis beparsha ashniya shel Krias Shema, la'acher shekvar hefiu beparsha rishayna, mepnei shebe'hifasam beparshas Eikev yesh chidush, kedivri Rashi. Why does the Torah have to say it again? Because there's something new, Rashi explains, that we're being taught in the second Parsha of Krias Shema about these mitzvahs that in the first Parsha we didn't know. Tzivui avas Hashem b'chol levavchem b'chol nafshchem mefiyah b'sheinis kam b'Parsha Shniya. Lamroi Parsha Vo'eschanan kvar kosva tzivi v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshcha. So why do you need to repeat it? So the repeating it is to teach you something new. Ki b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshcha zo yazhara l'yachid. V'ilu b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshcha zo yazhara l'tzibur. Like we see, one is lashon yachid, one is lashon abim. B'chol levavcha b'chol nafshcha. B'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshcha. Afat Sivuim Kshartim Ksaftim Mefim B'Shtei HaParshiyos, Yesh Chidush V'Teisefes Bahem, Bet Parshas Eikev L'Umas Parshas Vo'eschanan. Kedivri Rashi, Af La'acher Shetiglu, Hanichu Tefillin, Asum Mezuzos. Don't think that this is something only when you're in Eretz Yisrael. When you're in Eretz Yisrael, you have to keep the mitzvahs. When you go into Golus, maybe you'll think you don't have to do the mitzvahs. Comes Rashi, says no. Why does it say again, Ukshartem, that even then, when you're in Golus, you still have to keep the mitzvahs. Ubvada yesh havdol nikir be'at sivuy l'mata moismas b'neichem shel Parshas Eikev l'bein atzivuy v'shenantam l'v'nachad yibarta bam shel Parshas Vo'eschanan. What's the difference? One difference is Aleph b'milim v'shenantam l'v'nacham hakavonehi elo atalmidim. Rashi right away says that we find that the word levanecha doesn't only mean biological children. Levanecha can mean children b'muvan haruchni. The Alter Rebbe said that he is a grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov, but he's a spiritual grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov, because since his Rebbe was the Mezritcher Maggid, and the Mezritcher Maggid's Rebbe was the Baal Shem Tov, so he's a spiritual grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov. And he said, and with that I'm even better than Reb Baruch of Mezhebush, that he was only a physical grandchild. I'm a spiritual grandchild. So v'shinantam l'vanecha elu talmidim. That's going on the students. That's what it's talking about in the first Parsha of Krias Shema. V'ilu b'milim v'limatam oismas b'neichem hakavana hili yilodim kipshutam means literal, biological kids. Like at the end of the second Parsha of Krias Shema, it says that the days of your life, of yourselves and your children should increase. It's not talking about your spiritual children, it's talking about your physical children. The same thing, the teaching that it talks about in the second Parsha of Krias Shema is talking about physical children. That's one difference in the mitzvah of Torah and teaching Torah between the first Parsha and the second Parsha of Krias Shema. Beis, betzivi v'shenantum levenecham, ein nirmaz azman shebo yesh lahaskel v'lalamid saben hatalmid. There is no hint anywhere. All it says v'shenantum levenecham. When do you have to teach them? I don't know. Maybe when they're 40 years old, maybe when they're 20 years old. You know, there's people, Rahman Litzlan, that say, you know what, I'm going to let my children choose what they're going to do. Who says? Maybe you teach them later. You don't have to teach them right away. Why does it have to say the words l'daber bam? What does it come to add the words when it says l'daber bam? Nirmaz b'milim elu atzmam sheyesh lahaskel b'kach miyad kishaben yodeya l'daber. The Gemara learns out that means as soon as the child is able to speak, you right away start teaching him. You teach him brachas, you teach him Shema Yisrael, you teach him Moida Ani, and so on. V'af lifnekei, not just when he knows to speak. So the Rebbe has a very interesting diuk. The Gemara says a lashon kishatinik maschil ledaber. It's a sifri actually. When the child even just begins to speak, maybe wait with teaching him Torah till at least he's spoken a little bit, he's gotten used to it. No. Don't think the first words has to be mommy and tati and whatever, and then once he has a full vocabulary, you'll teach him Shema Yisrael, you'll teach him Moida'ani, you'll teach him brachas, you'll teach him sukim. No. Miyad kishatinik maschil ledaber is when you need to start teaching him Torah. Af lefneshu yedeya ledaber. So he says, Kol havdelim halolu that we just now said between the first Parsha of Krias Shema and the second Parsha of Krias Shema, noivim me'oisen akuda kemerumiz b'shmeiseim shel shtei haparshas. The Rebbe is going to connect it with the names of the Parsha. The Rebbe often emphasizes that the names of the Parsha is a core idea of the entire Parsha. Because just like we know, the Baal Shem Tov says, and the Alter Rebbe brings us down in Tanya, Sharichul V'Munah, Shmoy Asher Yiklu Lo B'Lashon HaKodesh, whatever name something is called in Lashon HaKodesh, that's its chayis. So the same thing doesn't just mean the name of a person or the name of something that was created in the world, but it also means the name of the Parsha also means and has in it the teichen and meaning of the Parsha. So the word Vo'eschanan and the word Eikev, these two things explain and express what the Parsha is about. Teichen shel Parsha Vo'eschanan lashon matnas chinam. Rashi right away explains when it says that Moshe Rabbeinu said, Vo'eschanan el Hashem. What was Moshe Rabbeinu trying to say? I daven to Hashem. Why does it use the word Vo'eschanan? There's 10 different lashonis for davening in Lashon Kodesh. Why does he use the word Vo'eschanan? Says Rashi, because Moshe Rabbeinu was asking for a matnas chinam. That's the meaning of the word Vo'eschanan. Vo'eschanan is used when a person is asking for a free gift. Which means it's coming a gift from above. If I'm asking something because I earned it, I'm asking it as reward, so that's not coming from above. I'm bringing it down. I'm doing it. But if I'm asking for a free gift, that means it's not coming from me. It's coming completely mamayla. So that's what Vo'eschanan is. Something that's coming from above to below. לכן גם תוכן הבקשה Vo'eschanan הוא שהכניסה לארץ ישראל תהיה על ידי מוישה, which Chazal say, פני מוישה כפני חמה, שהמושג פני חמה מויר על המשוכם על מיילה. The sun is something that's always shining, and it's coming from above. The moon, the Yidden are likened to the moon. It has to receive, it has to take in, it's a makabel. The sun is the mashpia. So the fact that we're saying Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to enter Eretz Yisrael, that was the request at the beginning of Parshas Vo'eschanan. So that's connected with the idea that Moshe is Pnei Cham, a revelation from above. Zeu has belakach ilu ha'isa knisa la'aretz nasai de Moshe he ha'isa misracheshes ba'ofen sheme'ala teva v'sheva umis lo'her nechamas b'Yisrael. That's what the Chazal bring down, that if Moshe Rabbeinu would have been the one to bring the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael, it would have been completely miraculous. They wouldn't have had to go to war at all. All the nations would have become this battle. Pnei gilu ya'or v'akoyach mel ma'ila shenimshach lamata. Ayidei pnei Moshe k'pnei Chama ein klal mokim lischashvas b'teva oilam u'be'umas oilam lahepech. Hem izbatlim mipnei kach. K'nemar namoigu kol yoshvei Knaan. That they melted by Krias Yamsuf. As soon as they heard about Krias Yamsuf, it said this is part of Oz Yashir. Oz Yashir was the song that the Eden sang by Krias Yamsuf. Already by Krias Yamsuf, all the Yoshvei Knaan were Namoigu. Tipa Alema Masa Afachad. So if Moshe Rabbeinu, who did the Krias Yamsuf and brought about all the Makkahs would have come into Eretz Yisrael, would have been the same thing. It would have continued this type of bittul of all the enemies of the Yidden. Umazai is Teichen shel Parshas Eikev shebnei Yisrael nimtzoyim b'matzav sheboi ein meir behem etzadatzim gilui ha'or shel ha'maylam b'doimel la'eikev sheba'adam shein meir by begoli chayes ha'nefesh. Chassidus always talks about that the heel, the foot, the sole of the foot is the lowest part. It's the least evident of it being alive. Everything else in the body, you could see some life force. The heel, you barely feel anything. You could put the heel on hot water and so on. You could step on things you're not necessarily going to feel. Not only that, in days when people didn't always walk around with shoes, and they even say these days, they say it's sometimes healthier, that their soles were like became so numbed that they could walk on a lot. We're very sensitive. We're going to walk on a few little rocks. We're going to, But you kept on walking on, outside without any shoes, they could walk on anything. So the idea of the heel, the sole, is something that the chayis of the neshama is not so much nicker. That's like the opposite of Amshachim Omayla. It's the total darkness. V'chol zois, even though the Yidden are feeling themselves completely insensitive like a heel, they're doing it on their own, not because of a revelation from above, which is called Tishmun. V'haya Eikev Tishmun. You listen. Ushmartem v'sisem oisam. It's your doing. Instead of it coming, Hamshacham al Maila, Parshas Vo'eschanan, V'hoya Eikev Tishmun, even though you're Eikev, you don't feel anything, like the time of Ikvis of the Mashiach, also we don't feel anything, still an all Tishmun, still an all, you do what you're supposed to do. Zela has Belakach, Teichen Abakosher Parshas Vo'eschanan, Kosher L'Re'iyah. What does that mean? It says that Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ebrana ve'eres haaretz. Chassidus talks all over. Why do you have to say Ebrana ve'eres haaretz? What's this expression? Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael. Fine, he wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael. What's this emphasis? Ebrana ve'eres. Ve'konis la'aretz, ve'ehye ba'aretz, ve'agur ba'aretz, ve'esyashev ba'aretz, whatever. What's this era? I should see the land. What's the concept of vision? So Chassidus always emphasizes that era is a very powerful type of revelation. When you see something, let's say if you see Hashem by Har Sinai, that's a powerful revelation from above. But if you don't see it, you're like us. We heard about Matan Torah. We heard about Har Sinai. We heard about Krias Yamsuf. Then the avoid is coming from us. Then it's coming Malmata L'mayla. L'ummas Parshas Eikev Shabon Nemer V'hoya Eikev Tishma'un. So that's a difference. Parshas Vo'eschanan is about Re'iyah, seeing godliness, and Parshas Eikev is about hearing about godliness. Ki mitzad gilu ya'er Malmayla Ha're'el L'kosi V'chinas Pshitas. Re'iyah royim es hadavar. So in other words, it's like taken for granted. You saw it, so that's it. There's nothing else. If it's me that's doing it, I can't on my own reach a level where I'm seeing godliness. As much as a person refines themselves, what part of their existence is taken for granted? The physical. Elikus, godliness, Hashem, spirituality, I still have to think about it, That's something that's not taken for granted. It's something I hear about. This, the food on the table, that I see. Elikus, I hear about. So therefore it's not as powerful, it's not such a great revelation. Even though seeing is a lot more powerful than hearing, Since I didn't do anything, for example, Matan Torah, the Jewish people didn't do anything. Hashem appeared to them. It was overwhelming. It's much more powerful than what we hear about Matan Torah. But because it comes from above, in Chassidus terminology, it's called makif. And therefore, it doesn't permeate me. 40 days later, they were able to make an egel. And 40 days later, they made an egel. Why? Because it was Re'iyah came from above. They didn't really change. They didn't become transformed. It didn't come from inside. It came al-Maila. L'umma zois, l'shmiya yesh Maila pnei Re'iyah b'kach, שבשמיע הכל נכנס בסויכל לאוזן עד שגב תיינוג מכל עורב נכנס ונרגש בפנימיוס ממש. You could enjoy seeing a beautiful painting, but the enjoyment of listening to a beautiful nigun is a lot more internalized. So just like when we have vision and hearing in worldly things, the same thing in ruchnius. וכשם שהדבר בראייה ושמיעה בענייני העולם, כך גם בעניין של וערה, שפרשס vo'eschanan, ותשמון שפרשס עקב. Shalom Reis, שדרגס תשמון נמוכה הרבה יויסר, ודרגס וערה, like we said before, ain't a די משמיע לראייה, seeing is a lot more powerful. Shalom Bikush Moshe, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu requested. Since Shmiya is something that the Yidden are doing, even though they're in a state of being an Eikev, b'shoyne meve'ere shetzricha le'nosem kematnas chino al-maila, l'chein yichoderes l'mata yoser pnimiyas. It's more about me. It's like a child. There's an example given for this. It says, Adam roitze bekav shaloi yoytze metisha kavim shachavere. So the Rebbe explains why is that? Because when I do it, then it's really mine. If it's given to me from above, it could be a lot more in quantity, but it's not my doing. And that's what we see a lot of times, a little kid, we want to do something for them. And they say, no, I want to do it. Their father or mother that does it, or an adult that does it, is going to do it so much better, but they want to do it. And when they do it, it means more to them than if you do it for them. That's the Maila of Eikev Tishmun over Ve'era. Ve'era comes from above. It's powerful, it's great, it's perfect, it's beautiful, but it's not me. Shmiya, Eikev Tishmun, even though I don't feel anything, I'm like a heel, but I'm doing it anyway, it's coming from me, it's much more powerful. וכשם שלגבי ישראל עצמו משפיע האופן של עקב תשמון יסר הפנימייס מהאופן של vo'eschanan וערה, כך גם לגבי ההשפעה על אומות העולם. Listen to this very interesting thing. הידי עברנה וערה מסבטלס אומות העולם כלפי ישראל כדי לאל בסיפי. We said, נמייגו כל יושבי כנען, טיפה עליהם עם מסע הפחד. It's not that they become transformed. They melt away. What does that mean, Baruch Tiyam Mikol Ha'amim? From the nations themselves will come the bracha to the Yidden. Shagam Kol Ha'amim Heim Atzmam Mivarch Mis Yisrael Uknes Yisrael Miskaleses Mitzara Iseha, from those that are making problems for her, or like in the Ha'ara it says Mikroy V'Seha. So what we see is that even though we don't have the mile of Moshe Rabbeinu, but by us doing our work, and it's little by little, and it's in a way of Shemiah, so then the nations of the world respect us more and become transformed more. L'shmiya yesh mile nisef sal pnei re'iyam koyach hariyah hu koyach mile achu proti umesuyam biyoser le'uma zois koyach hashmiya kosher lechlalusay ulatzmiyusay shel adam kfi shekevas ha'alacha shesimay noisen loydmei einay chershay noisen loydmei kulay. There's an interesting halacha about damages. When a person damages another person, so there's multiple things that you have to pay for. You have to pay for embarrassment, you have to pay for doctor's bills, you have to pay for different things. There's 5 things you usually have to pay for. Suffering. One of the things you have to pay for is value. If chas v'sholom, one person cuts off someone else's hand or foot, the person has to pay the value of the hand or the foot. In addition to pain and embarrassment and being unemployed because of it and doctor's bills, there's also the value of that thing itself. How do you determine the value? So the Chazal say like this: you look and you see how much would a person like this age, this height, this muscle build, whatever, be valued, being sold as a servant with a hand, and how much is less is value without a hand. So on top of the 4 other things that you have to pay him, you have to give him that value. Now that applies by every part of the body, including even if chas v'sholom the person made him blind. But when it comes, if a person made another person deaf, then there's no value that's like less or more. You have to pay whatever this person would have been completely sold for in the servants and the slaves marketplace, because the idea of hearing has to do with the entirety of the person. The practical reason is because if the person is working for you and he can't hear what you're telling him, so that there's no way he could serve you, so he has no value. But al pi pnimis inyanim, it's because hearing is much more completely related to the person. וגם עניין זה נכלל באיקב תשמון, שדווקא באמצעות העבודה הרוחנית של איקב תשמון מגיעים לידי גילוי עצמוס יתברך, שתסגלה לעשות לווי, כפי שמפרש המדרש על והויה איקב, שכרם באיקב אני פורע לכם. That the reward will be paid at the heel, meaning at the end of times. Dafka, when Mashiach comes, will become the payment for Tishmon. Now, based on what we explained, these general differences, Vo'eschanan is from above, Eikev is from below, this is more external, this is more internal, we'll be able to understand all the differences that we spoke about between the first Parsha of Krias Shema and the second Parsha of Krias Shema. זהו ההסבר למספר ההבדלים שבין הפרשה השנייה של קריאס שמע של פרשת עקב לבין הפרשה הראשונה של קריאס שמע של פרשת וחנן. כאשר מאיר גילוי אור מלמעלה, הנילה ממגבלת האדם, מורגש האור בעיקר בכוחות המקיפים, which are in Kabbalah, the level of the makif of the neshama is called, we know there's 5 different names in neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama, those are internal koiches. And then there's what's called koiches makifim, beyond the person of the neshama. That's chaya yechida. When his chaya yechida are inspired, so the person leaves his limitations behind. It's what I'm doing, not because of a revelation from above. The person doesn't break out of his limitations. לכן, הפרשה הראשונה של קריאת שמע היא אזהרה ליחיד, ונאמר בו גם בכל מועדיך, ואילו הפרשה השנייה של קריאת שמע היא אזהרה לציבור, ונאמר בו רק בכל לבבכם, בכל נפשכם. כי האור, אזהרה, גם מלושן זוהר ואור, it said, אזהרה ליחיד, which also means it's an oir for a yachid. It's a zoyar. It's a shine, a revelation to a yachid. Haba malmayla. Kimatnas chinam. It's a gift from above. Murgish bedargis hayechida benefesh. That's why it says azhar al-yachid. Where is it felt? It's felt in the part of the nefesh that's called yechida al-yachtach, the part that's above everything. Chassidus explains that what does it mean b'chol ma'idecha? Just like when you have toiv and you have toiv ma'oid. Ma'oid means beyond anything. So the level of b'chol ma'idecha means breaking out of hagbolos, breaking out of limitations, breaking out of boundaries. So in the first parsha of Krias Shema, where we're talking about a revelation, azhara liyachid, to the Yechida, because the level of Re'iyah, Matnas Chinam, a revelation from above. So that's why it says B'chol Meidecha. It's a Zoyhar, it's an oir, it's a revelation to the Tzibur. There's a story with, I don't remember, I think it was one of the Rabbeim, that he says he's davening b'tzibur, even though he was davening alone. Why is he davening b'tzibur? Because his minyan, his tzibur, is the eser koiches hanefesh. He's gathering together all the spheres in his nefesh, his chabad, chagas, nehim, and so on. That affects the tzibur. The eser koiches hanefesh, a love that has to do with you. A love that's part of you, like the Eikev Tishmun coming from inside of you. Zeh has Parsha of Krias Shema Mafia HaTorah Lefnei HaMitzvahs. We said before. First it says V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam, and then it says Kshartam. V'ilu Parsha Shniya Shel Krias Shema Musker Inyan HaMitzvahs Tchila. First it talks about Tefillin. Then it says V'limaltem es v'neichem l'daber bam. When we're talking about the revelation from above, then Talmud Gadol. Just like first Hashem came down in Har Sinai, told the Yidden the mitzvahs, and then they started doing the mitzvahs, and they went into Eretz Yisrael, and they continued doing the mitzvahs. Because we're talking about from above. So Talmud is greater. Talmud, the learning comes first. You got to learn about the mitzvahs. But if you're looking about what's more involving me, what's changing me more, when I do something in action, when I take the lowest part of myself, which is the power of action, not serving the Hashem with my intellect. A lot of lahavdil, other people that are not familiar with Yiddishkeit can understand, yes, serve Hashem with your mind, serve Hashem with your heart. But action, kosher, tefillin, who cares? But if it's coming from you, if it's about transforming myself, so then action, Maisa Gadol. And the learning is only to help the Maisa. So that's why the second Parsha of Krias Shema, which is about Milmata L'mayla, it's about Eikev Tishmun, that the heel should have it. So we have the Maisa first. First we have the mitzvah of film, and then it says V'limata. Lefiza muvar madua mefiayin shel schar v'oinish dafke Parsha Shnia shel Krias Shema. Bedarge shel riyas alakus mekayim mitzvahs mneitzivei HaKadosh Baruch Hu gam l'loy kabol schar al kiyumam l'loy anish al aveda. Because it's coming from above. It's a revelation from above. It's almost like we can't help ourselves. It's a revelation from above. We do it like automatically, like robots. V'ilu ha'matzav shel Eikev k'shetzarech la'ashpia shemetzad ha'adam yeh tishmun v'shmartam v'asisam oisam hari oz tzarech lahaskel la'adam ha'se'in shel schar v'oinish k'dei la'oirer oisoi. You want him to make the choice. How do you get him to make the choice? You tell him there will be benefits and there will be consequences and so on. ובמיוחד כאשר הסדר בקיים המצוות מצד האדם הוא מדרגה לדרגה נעלס יויסר בשלוי לשמה ולאחר ארגס רבס אלו מגיע לידי לשמה כפי שמרחב בכך הרמב"ם כשמלמדים הסקטנים עד שתיר בדייתם וישחקם חוכמיס יסיירה איינשם. The Rambam says, it's taken from a Gemara, la'olam yilmad adam shaloi lishma shemitay shaloi lishma balishma. The Seder is, when you educate a person, when you educate a child, you have to start with Shaloi Lishma. So the same thing, Parshas Eikev, second Parsha of Krias Shema, it's about our own self-education. So we start with Loi Lishma. We start with fulfilling a mitzvah, not for the sake of the mitzvah, but because there's reward, and there's Chas v'Shalom, the opposite of reward, because that's the order when you're going Milmata L'mayla. Those are the steps on the ladder to go up closer and closer to Hashem. Ach b'kol zois mefia achidush al kiyum ha-mitzvahs af la'acher shetiglu dafke Parsha Shnia. Where do we learn out that mitzvahs are done even when the Yidden go in Golus? Only in the second Parsha. V'ilu mitzvah Parsha Rishonim shel Krias Shema Yesh Haftorahs shebizman hagolus lo yikaymu oisem v'af yoser mekach yitochen shelo yiyeh tzivui lekaymu. There would have been a havamina. We would have thought that we shouldn't have to fulfill it. If you're talking about from the first Parsha's perspective, you could have thought that in Golus you wouldn't have to do it. Im kima mitzvahs neveh rak mitzad gilui ershim al mayla ki Parsha Rishonim shel Krias Shema Yitochen shebizman hagolus kasher oir mistalik lo yikaymu chas shalom mitzvahs. What's the whole idea of Golus? Golus, Hashem is concealed. There's no revelation from above. Like you're soon going to say. So therefore, if you're talking about revelation from above and you're connecting that to mitzvahs, so if there's no revelation from above, you might chas shalom think there's no reason for mitzvahs. Bekach ein shum shinuyim. Va'avoida zu kayamas gam b'tkufas hagolus, because it's not dependent upon the revelation from above. It's coming from me. So me, I'm here regardless. Time of Golus, not time of Golus, it anyway should be there. Ukeshem shekiyam tzivui v'chiyuv al kiyam ha-mitzvahs, heim lifnei shagolus. ובמיוחד בזמן הבייס כאשר יש גילוי אור, והן בזמן הגולוס כאשר oisesenu loiraim. We didn't see any signs. We didn't see any simonim al milo. We didn't see any miracles. Kach kiyum atzivu v'chiyuv v'shinantam hein al odem bardas hamevnes yokra toira v'hein al tinek hamaskal adaber, because it's not about the revelation. V'lechein mefia dafke parsha shniya chidush misha shatinik maskal adaber aviv melamdei toira. Because if you're dealing with the first Parsha of Krias Shema, that over there it's about revelation, so maybe if someone is holding by a high level by revelation, he has to study Torah. But since the second Parsha is about coming from ourselves, regardless of where we're holding, so that we learn the child is just starting to say words, right away you teach him Torah. וזהו ההסבר לכך שהפרשה הראשונה שבקריאת שמע מופיע הציווי ללמד לבניך אלו התלמידים, ואילו הפרשה השנייה מופיע הציווי ללמד את מויסס מניכם כפשוטו. Shouldn't it be it seems to be a little bit out of order. Shouldn't the first parsha be talking about your children, and then it says, you know what, not only do you have to teach your children, you have to teach your students also. But based on this difference coming from above or from below, we'll understand why the first parsha is Talmidim and the second parsha is Banim. Ki inyan zeh shel limud Torah shebayin havdol ben adam balavon or ben tinik hamaskal daber kosher le'etzem ha'adam ha'nayla min ha'seichel. It has to do with the person himself. V'kan kosher ha'inyan shel as beneichem b'mashpois ha'pshuta ki ha'ben hu mi'etzem ha'av. This always explains. The ben is not just from the father's intellect. Who ben miyadim ivoldoi ukadayim. It's not how much he understands what his father is that makes him his son. L'umas talmid asher nasa talmid bi yoyse bardas kivshu loymet itzla rava chadayim. V'lechein ha'ashpol talmidim ya'ara belvad. So now we're going to finally connect this with the two Haftorahs. Why the first Haftorah is Nachmu Nachmu Ami, and why the second Haftorah is that the Yidden complain and say they don't want to hear it from the Nevi'im, they want to hear it from Hashem himself. Lefi kala amar le'il muvin ha'kesher shel Haftorah Nachmu Nachmu leParshas Vo'eschanan v'shel Haftorah v'atomer tzion leParshas Eikev. Nachmu Nachmu Ami yoymar alekechem hi nechama mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is something that's an inspiration from above. It's Hashem's revelation. But when Hashem reveals to us, He only reveals an external part of the light. The Nevi'im are not on the level of Hashem Himself. It's from him, the person himself. Shari Adrab is a matzav sheboy hamatam margish v'oimer azavanim shachani. El advarim elu mitzad tzion atzma. The Yidden themselves are saying, we want it. Eikev tishmun. It's coming from us. V'chivim shavoydim malmat chederes la'atzmius lachein dorish miyisrael davke mitzad avidosim v'toimer tzion. Shanacham Aidan Nevi'im Einam Aspekevs El Ritzainam Shanacham Tovim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba'atzmai Va'az Kvish Mesayim HaMedrash Maskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Tanosam Shanacham Aidan Nevi'im Einam Aspekevs. And next week's Haftorah, Parshas Re'ei, it's going to start V'oimra Aniyah Soyara Loinucham. The poor one that was like storming was not comforted, Hashem says. And then the Parshas shoifed him afterwards. That's the Haftorah. After that Haftorah, it says, I will do the Nechama. Not the Nevi'im, not like in last week's Parsha, that Hashem told the Nevi'im, Nachmu, Nachmu, Ami, but instead, I will do the Nechama. And what's the true Nechama that comes from Hashem himself? The Gula Mitzvah Shleimah de Mashiach Tzidkenu Yovav Yichaleinu B'Karim Mamash.